is that despite the fact that achievements have been made, we still have a long way to go. Countries are yet to start putting in place national action points for the implementation of Resolution 1325. 1325 calls for the protection of women during conflict. It also calls for the prevention of conflict by making sure that laws are being promulgated to address impunity. And it also ensures that women sit on the peace and conflict resolution table so that they will also contribute to the peace in their country. But let me also say that we must address the issue of arms trade, which is fueling the wars in Africa. Arms are going to be very important. They fuel the war and they continue. So we now have the Arms Trade Treaty, which came into effect last year, December, and many countries are yet to adopt or sign or ratify. It is important that we put under control and surveillance the transfer of arms between and among countries. We must ensure that we put in check those that are manufacturing the arms, because once arms are being manufactured, wars will always come, because it's a lucrative trade. So this is important. For us in Pan-African Parliament, we must ensure that our national parliaments encourage the ratification of the Arms Trade Treaty and also the implementation. Mr. Speaker,
thank you very much. And I give the floor to the Honourable Marie Mediatrice Isabilaza from Rwanda.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, let me start by saying thank you for the warm welcome extended to all of us since we got into this family of ours that the Pan-African Parliament is. And I would like to also thank the chairperson of the Council for Peace and Security of the Pan-African Parliament on the state of peace and security in Africa, which calls upon us to multiply our efforts to ensure that peace reigns across the continent. Mr. President, the various acts of violence against the population, violence against women and children, which occur on a daily basis, calls upon us to understand and know which mechanism the Pan-African Parliament has come up with through the network of parliamentarian women to ensure follow-up and evaluation of the implementation of Resolution 1325 in Africa, to which all countries have agreed. We want to know how the Women's Network is carrying out the follow-up. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to the Honourable Joseph Mbandam from Cameroon.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to rise to join my voice with the chairperson of our Standing Committee on Cooperation and International Relations to say that we are complacent when issues arise. In Burkina Faso, the population rose and threw off a president. In Burundi, the very situation has arisen and produces a contrary reaction. Now, in 1990, when the wind of democracy blew across Africa, we adopted constitutions with provisions that limited the number of times an incumbent can represent himself for elections. There came a time when this issue is being reversed. We clamored for the adoption and ratification of the African Charter on Democracy, Elections and Good Governance, I would say. In Section 8, in Part 8 of that charter, it is clearly written that any unconstitutional change of the Constitution that will perpetuate an incumbent president to maintain himself in power is null and void and must be followed by sanctions. When I come to this issue, it is what we, the representatives of the people who get into the streets when these violations are taking place, are supposed to do. We are used to talking in the House here without taking specific decisions. I think we need a resolution and a recommendation as to how we must behave in the face of all these malpractices and complacency, as the president of the Cooperation and International Relations Standing Committee has raised here. We stand on the side of the people. We know that in the commission is made up of members very often of the executive, and they are very likely to cite presidential endeavors. So I move that we do not keep hitting our tables here, but as we discuss, we must arrive at specific resolutions as the people's representatives. And in this particular case, I think we all prompted the ratification of the African Charter on Democracy, Elections, and Good Governance. It should be our role here to decide in conformity therewith and take resolutions that enhance the positions of the people of Africa. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable. And I'll give the floor to the Honorable Kamara Ali Gouladio from Mauritania.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, having listened to the brilliant statement read by the Honorable Chairperson of the African Union Peace and Security Council, one can only applaud her statement. However, despite the increase in the activities of this organ and the various interventions of the African Union in the presence of the various conflicts that bedevil the continent, our worry remains at the highest level possible because problems continue growing, and it is important that we begin analyzing the causes and to tackle them with courage and commitment. It is important that prevention be the order of the day. However, our illustrious Assembly ought to ensure that within the committees that it sets out to create, that we are given a detailed report with very clear and concrete proposals, allowing us to come up with a very detailed resolution which will then anchor democracy in our respective countries to make it a daily reality. In our countries, conflicts are disguised through exclusion, poor governance, and by the refusal to change turns at the head of our government. And we can see how changes can happen in a true democracy. I think that poverty has become something that bedevils the entire planet, and in Africa it has become the order of the day, and therefore we need to study the reasons behind it and have in mind poverty, exclusions, that we need to begin to work towards resolving with courage. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. And I give the floor to the Honorable Alexandra Barrow-Chambere from Gabon.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, in turn, I would like to congratulate the chairperson of the Council for Peace and Security of the Pan-African Parliament, of the African Union, for the manner in which he tackled the numerous problems, and also to refer to the preceding statement by Kamari Ali Gouladio, whose point of view I share totally with regard to the causes of the conflicts. My sense is that it is important that we speak of consolidating political, economic, social and security organs, but it is important that we also underline, as Honorable Kezabo had stated, that we begin to working towards improving and grounding democracy, so that this then leads to better governance, transparency, and to accept that people are held accountable and resources are equally shared, as well as upholding the rights of citizens. Because any decision that goes in a direction that does not encourage democracy should not be entertained. We need to make sure that if we pursue our quest for security, it should therefore exclude oppressing our citizens. Regarding elections, I wanted to state as well that, and here I agree with what our colleagues have stated, that we continue to strengthen the role of the Pan-African Parliament. Since I had been in Benin not too long ago to observe elections, it is quite clear that the government in place tend to use the various observation missions that we do through the African Union. They use that to try and justify their hold on power. I think we need to be there for a longer time, because 6 or 5 days is not sufficient time for us to know that the actual voters' roll would have already been sorted out. So therefore, our role is really limited, and we're not going to be there to try and caution elections that in nature are not proper. And on Burundi, Mr. President, it is necessary that we remain vigilant to avoid that country does not fall into additional problems following the recent events there. And on xenophobia, I think we need to come up with a resolution where we condemn this matter wholeheartedly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. And I give the floor to the Honorable Oyango Kakoba from Uganda.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President and honorable members, when Africa gained independence, there was a lot of hope that this would come along with stability. And indeed, this was the case for quite some time. Because from the time the first African country got independence to around 1990, there were just about 10 conflicts on the continent, leave alone the coups, if we are not talk about that. But it is sad that from around 1990 up to now, we have had over 50 conflicts on the African continent. And sad enough, these conflicts are mostly internal. And to make it worse, some of these conflicts have been recurring. I've been involved in the issue of trying to sort out issues of peace in the Great Lakes. And I remember very well in 1998, I was part of the team that first went to Burundi to try to bring about peace in that country. When we went to Burundi, Bujumbura, the whole town was deserted. There was no one in the town. We traveled up country. The whole place was deserted. And finally, when peace came, we thought that probably that would be a learning lesson. But it looks like we don't learn. And that is said. There's a saying that one thing we learn from history is that we don't learn from history. And that is not only true for Burundi, but even for some other African countries. Mr. President, what do we need to do? I think what we need to do is to strengthen governance on the African continent. First, internally. Once we work on the governance issues, then conflicts will be minimized. Secondly, I think it is high time, as my colleagues have proposed, we also need to make sure that as a continent, we enforce the mechanisms that we put in place. We have a lot of good conventions and good provisions in these conventions, but incidentally, we are not putting them in force. My colleague from Cameroon just talked about the Convention on Democracy, Governance and Elections. But even within the AU, there are provisions within the Constitutive Act that give these countries powers to intervene, but in most cases they don't, because they belong to the same club. Mr. President, the other thing that we need to do when it comes to the issue of terrorism is to make sure that we join hands. As Uganda, we have been involved in Somalia, and we have also been involved in bringing about peace in other countries, neighboring countries like South Sudan. But we need to work together, and I thank those countries that have been involved, even those in the Boko Haram areas, to make sure that we bring peace on the continent. Mr. President, the other issue that we need to do is to make sure that we implement, we operationalize the regional standby forces. This is provided for within the mechanism of the African peace and security. But these regional forces have not been operationalized, and I do believe that this would go a long way in helping us to make sure that we fight these negative forces and also put in place preventive mechanisms. Mr. President,
Thank you very much. And I give the floor to the Honorable Kumundan Judah Mohammed from Sudan.
بسم الله والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم. أشكرك يا فخامة السيد الرئيس لهذه الفرصة.
Mr. President, for the opportunity given me
وأرجو
to
أن
take the
تسمحوا لي
floor.
بأن أشيد بالأعمال والخدمات الجليلة التي قدمتموها
the services you have been rendering to the Pan-African Parliament.
بالأمس أمام هذا البرلمان العظيم كما أشيد بالتقرير الأخ الكريم حسبه نائب رئيس جمهورية السودان الذي قدمهم أمام هذا البرلمان.
Presented yesterday by the Vice President of the Republic of Sudan yesterday. I would like also to highly appreciate the report presented by Madame the Ambassador of Niger and Chairperson of the African Peace and Security Council. Mr. President, we need much more support from the Peace and Security Council as well as all as the APSA to settle the problems of Sudan and to support the efforts of Sudan in order to achieve peace, security and sustainable development. We have been witnessing wars and conflicts in Sudan, especially in the Blue Nile and the South Kordofan. I wish that all the stakeholders be involved in these regions, in this country, in order for us to settle and resolve our problems and our conflicts. If goodwill is there in order for us to achieve peace, security and sustainable development in our country. I thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you, and I give the floor to the Honorable Jacqueline Ohangieri from Rwanda.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, allow me to thank the members of Parliament of the Pan-African Parliament, starting with the President and the Secretariat of the Pan-African Parliament for the warm welcome that has been extended to the new MPs since we got to the headquarters of our institution. Secondly, I would like to say thank you to Her Excellency Mrs. Amina Jibo Diallo, Ambassador of Niger and Chairperson of the African Union Peace and Security Council, for her excellent statement on topics that we deem to be extremely important in our quest for peace and security across the continent. Allow me, Mr. President, to state how I feel concerned by the situation in Burundi, with whom I share the aspirations, because it is an important country for the Pan-African Parliament. And yesterday, in the East African Caucus, we wanted to see how best we can organize ourselves to discuss this extremely important matter among ourselves. And as a neighboring country, Tanzania and Rwanda have already welcomed a number of refugees. There are women, children who are suffering, and I hope that peace and security is going to be attained to try and allay the fears and concerns of the people of Burundi. I take this opportunity, Mr. President, to note that poor governance and the fight by the leadership to maintain themselves at the helm, as well as when elections approach, does lead to destabilization among the African people. As the Pan-African Parliament President stated, it is about time that the Pan-African Parliament comes up with a very clear mechanism, a viable mechanism, which is going to help us better manage elections as well as the post-electoral period. This is extremely important because elections now constitute an opportunity recurrent for politicians to undermine the stability of our countries. It is important that in our constitutions we begin to speak about how best to share power, to have policies of inclusion. I know that this mechanism exists, but we need to implement them, as so clearly stated by my colleague from Uganda. In this regard, I think this is an opportunity for the Pan-African Parliament to give us
Thank you very much. And I give the floor to the Honorable Bongani Ndululi from Swaziland.
Thank you, Mr. President. Maybe to begin with, let me thank Her Excellency Diallo for raising such a pertinent issue. In fact, one of the objectives of the PAP is to tackle issues of peace and security. And for such reasons, I believe, Mr. President, we have to make our voices clear on this issue, and our contribution should be aggressive. We should never be passive about it. Mr. President, there are certain domains in which Africa is lacking, and in order to overcome the problem, we must prop up ourselves. Maybe it is worth saying that we have to overcome issues of prejudice and religious divides. Where different religions coexist, we must make sure that there is friendship between such religions. Also, Mr. President, we have to empower communities to solve conflict without violence. Such issues have got to be tackled at grassroots level. We as communities out there must do something to help ourselves. So it will be important really that we get to the culture of knowing how to solve problems without conflict. Another issue, Mr. President, is the issue of the youth. These are the very people who are being exploited by the ruthless militants. And it will be important maybe to submit, Mr. President, that the youth has to be trained, in fact, to build peace within the divides of war. The youth should be the people to be trained to reject armed militants and to avoid a civil war, because they are the young people with all the energy. And if at the back of their minds they have the training and that knowledge that they've got to be perpetrators of peace, then in a way, Mr. President, we'll be safe. In another aspect, Mr. President, I will call on the Peace and Security Council itself to make conspicuous strides in trying to solve issues of peace and security, because they are the very people who are tasked with this mammoth task. So there should be transparency and honesty even amongst themselves, Mr. President. Let me also touch on the issue of solidarity between states. It has to be maximized, Mr. President, if we want to see ourselves.
Thank you very much. And I give the floor to the Honorable Said Brahim Said from Sahrawi Arab Republic.
In the name of Allah, peace be upon the Prophet. At the outset, allow me to extend my thanks to Her Excellency Diallo, Chairperson of the African Union Peace and Security Council, for presenting the state of security in Africa. This confirms the endeavors that are being made in order to achieve peace and security all over Africa. I would like first to commend the positive efforts made by the African countries through the Peace and Security Council and the African Union Commission in favor of the Sahrawi cause. It is an African cause, and the African Union is a partner with the United Nations in the efforts aiming at settling the conflict in the Sahrawi Republic. The United Nations works and collaborates closely with the African Union through Mr. Joaquin Chissano, the Special Representative of the UN for Sahrawi Republic, in line of the concrete steps that have been taken by the Peace and Security Council in order to end the last occupation within the African continent and to enable the Sahrawi people to achieve their independence and self-determination through the UN resolution and the African Union plan. But unfortunately, and after 40 years of deprivation and of depriving the Sahrawi people from their legitimate rights to independence and sovereignty, the efforts of the African Union are still faced with the problems and difficulties triggered by the Security Council, and I say the Security Council, especially France, that is impeding the efforts made in favor of the human rights in the Sahrawi Republic, and also to limit the prerogatives of MINURSO and to prevent it from covering the situation of human rights in the refugee camps in the Sahrawi Republic. This impedes the efforts made by the United Nations and the African Union.
Thank you very much. I will now give the floor to the Honorable Dawda Traoré from Côte d'Ivoire. It's not here. May I now give the floor to the Honorable Paramount Chief Baiko Kanagboro from Sierra Leone.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. President, we just have to thank the presenter for a good document presented to this noble house. But what I see here is just the true analysis of the African continent. For me, the prime factor that we have failed entirely to address is the unity of the African continent. We talk of individual countries, individual ideas, yes, but do we have the one voice, the one Africa, and the one government to address those issues? When some of us were young, in 1964, they said 50 years from now, Africa will be like Europe. Where are we today? Do we come close to Europe or even China? Sierra Leone was far better than China in 1964. Today we are beggars from China. We talk of development. Where is development? No education, science and technology. We are now going backward in terms of technology. The West, the East are far advancing. Talk of Ebola, we had to beg from China. Thanks to God, Uganda came in, Kenya came in, South Africa came in, and other neighboring countries helped. But Cuba came in and supported us than any other country in the world. Where is the political will of the African people? We talk every time, we write every time. 54 heads of state can unite Africa, but everybody wants to be a head of state. That is a problem. Africa, where is your military might to defend and protect your children, your youths, your women? Africa, what is your agenda for your future? Your children, women, youths, and the disabled. Africa, where are your scientists to harness your raw materials for your youths, women, children, and the disabled? Africa, where are your factories to provide jobs for your youths? 98% of what we use in the African continent, we import. Even salt we eat, we import. Rice we eat, we import. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to the Honorable Boubacar Boda from Burkina Faso.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Estimés représentants des peuples africains,
distinguished representatives
prenant
of
la parole
African
pour la première
peoples,
fois devant votre auguste
taking the floor
assemblée,
in the first time,
vous me permettrez de vous apporter le salut fraternel
convey to
du peuple
you
du
the
Burkina Faso.
brotherly
Ainsi que vous le
greetings
savez,
of the people of Burkina
ce
Faso.
peuple,
As
dans
you may
son
know,
engagement
these
en
people
faveur
in
de
this commitment in
l'approfondissement de la
favor of
démocratie,
deepening democracy
a, par un soulèvement
has,
populaire,
through
les 30 et 31
a popular
octobre 2014,
uprising in
dit non
October
à une
2014,
tentative de
said
modification de la
no
Constitution.
to an attempt to
Ce qui a
change
valu
constitution.
la démission du président Blaise
And this
Compaoré.
led to the
C'est donc avec un intérêt vif
resignation of President Compaoré. I've been following this brilliant presentation by Her Excellency Diallo, whom I congratulate, especially in relation to the issues relating to Burkina Faso. Your Excellency, in your presentation, the French version, page 7, paragraph 2, second sentence, you recalled that the holding of elections in conditions of peace is a demonstration of the commitment of states to abide by the principles of the African Union contained in the Charter of Democracy, elections and governance. Mr. President, honorable MPs, it is an opportunity for me to draw the attention of the public opinion of Africa on the need for the African Union and its organs to start and initiate its process of conflict prevention and management in order to refute what the accusations that the African Union is slow in acting. Currently, an electoral law was passed in April 2015, where one part of the political class is excluded from the incoming elections. This exclusion is seriously affecting the exercise of the freedom of opinion and freedom of expression, and also to the principle of parliamentarian immunity, because this is clearly a matter of opinion that is deprived through this exclusive law. This is why I'm calling upon the African Union and all its organs to tackle and to deal with the case seriously with the case of Burkina Faso, in order for us to avoid
Gracias por su intervención y ahora.
Thank you very much, and I now give the floor to Honorable Abdou Daye from Senegal.
Thank you, Madam Vice President, Madam Vice President, dear colleagues. I would like, first of all, to congratulate Her Excellency, the Ambassador on her brilliant presentation. Dear colleagues, Africa as a whole is seriously threatened, and it is experiencing a serious crisis. Why? Why all the violence and terrorist attacks prevail in Africa, almost only in Africa? This is serious questions that we have to raise. Dear colleagues, let's be candid. Africa is the enemy of Africa. And to my opinion, there is three key elements that should be incorporated in the package of items that we have to reflect on. First, the Assembly of the Heads of State of the African Union, that is in itself an issue, because with regard to the positions that are expressed and the decisions that are made, we wonder and raise many interrogations about the comprehension and understanding that we have of one Africa, one voice. The second issue or item is that the northern countries, the countries of the northern hemisphere, do not want the development of Africa, and they are the source of almost all our problems. The third idea of my intervention is that the problems that we experience in some African countries, that is the Islamist state. I am a Muslim. I come from Senegal. Fortunately, we have what we call the Brotherhood Islam. And all those who are familiar with international relations know that what is said through our conferences and our media have nothing to do with the reality. This is a call I would like to make, to take on board all these issues so that the Pan-African Parliament be able to visit all these countries, the countries concerned, and say the truth to their populations. Africa is suffering, and this is not normal. And we, as colleagues, we need to take our destiny in our hands. I thank you very much for listening, and thank you, Madam Vice President.
Thank you very much. And I now give the floor to Honorable Mahari Quattara from Côte d'Ivoire.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. I would like to congratulate Madam the Ambassador on her presentation, which was really crystal clear and honest. I wanted as well to congratulate Honorable Kanzabo for his direct language and honest language. Talking about hypocrisy, yes, there is hypocrisy. As you said, Madam, the deep root causes are known. That is poverty, poor governance, and poverty is a consequence of poor governance. Therefore, Madam, why do we always play the firefighters within the African Union instead of taking radical measures? The Charter for Good Governance does exist, so let's find ways and means to impose it on the African states. It might be ridiculous, but this is the radical solution. We need to have a positive dictatorship, a positive dictatorship within the African Union, because we have to impose good governance on our heads of state who have all contributed to drafting this charter. The incoming elections are known and the problems are known. Let me take the case of Burundi. There is a parliamentarian mission that went to Burundi, and they crafted a report. So, Madam, let's be proactive. Why not having a positive dictatorship in order to avoid the numerous deaths in the future, avoid death and the losses in life? So please, Madam, a positive dictatorship to impose this Charter on Good Governance on our African heads of state. I thank you.
Thank you very much. And I now give the floor to Honorable Janet Kabila from the Democratic Republic of Congo.
Thank you very much, Madam Vice President. Let me congratulate Her Excellency the Ambassador on her presentation. I note this time that my country has not been dealt with in this report. However, I would like to inform you that our army of the DRC continues to fight and control armed forces that result from external conflicts. Madam Vice President, we need to reject and at the same time condemn any attempt of coup d'etats within our African continent without taking into account the reasons behind such coups, because resorting to weapons, to arms as a solution to problems should be over. As it happens, as it is the case in Europe and developed countries, I would suggest that our Pan-African Parliament be further involved in prevention, conflict prevention, beyond our inquiry missions during the conflict situations. Madam Vice President, we do regret this xenophobic situation that happened here in South Africa. And my own fellow citizens were victims of such acts, xenophobic acts. The peace and security should tackle this issue with great attention when the security of African people should be as well taken on board on time, in time of peace. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you very much for your contribution. And I now call upon Sakdal Abdurrahman from the Sahrawi Democratic Republic.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of Allah. Thank you. I would like to thank the chairperson of Peace and Security Council for the detailed report on the situation of peace and security in Africa. And I would like as well to say that the report has not reflected the efforts, the huge efforts that are being made by the African Union through its organs, the AUC and the Peace and Security Council and the PAP, the Pan-African Parliament, in favor of the Sahrawi cause. These efforts should be subject to a recommendation of this session, as well as the resolution of the Peace and Security, AU Peace and Security, on its meeting of March 2015 that decided to reactivate the Committee of 10 heads of state, as well as other issues regarding the illegal exploitation of the natural resources of the Sahrawi Republic by Morocco. In the same vein, Peace and Security Council, the AU Peace and Security Council also held a meeting on April 2015, and came up with a declaration in which the Council deplores the non-acceptance by the UN Security Council of the proposal by the AU Peace and Security Council to have the former President Joachim Chissano address the states of peace and, the UN Peace and Security Council. There are therefore huge efforts that have been made by the African Union Commission and the AU Peace and Security Council that are not accepted or are not supported by the UN Peace and Security Council and the international community, and are not supported by the UN General Secretary. My question, therefore, don't you think that this situation, that is the lack of interest accorded to the decisions made by the AU Peace and Security Council and the fact of not taking them seriously, doesn't that reflect the lack of partnership and cooperation between the AU and the UN, especially when it comes to the issues of peace and security in Africa?
Thank you very much for your contribution. Before I give the floor to the next speaker, I have the fourth Vice President of the Parliament,
the Pan-African Parliament, that has a medical consultation, and he wishes to take the floor before he goes to the doctor. Thank you.
Traducción.
Yes. Thank you, Madam Vice President. I would like to take this opportunity to congratulate the presenter for a brilliant presentation. At the same time, I wanted to see in her presentation regarding the Libya, especially the expansion of IS, Islamic State, to African failed state. And they slaughtered, beheaded the 21 Egyptian Christians and 30 Ethiopians. And this failed state in Africa has become host for the Islamic State. And we don't know, also Burundi's destination will be where. And the African Union, in this regard, is exerting minimum, I will say, is doing little. And you are not as such successful as you wanted because you are not engaging Pan-African Parliament, parliamentarians. You are not engaging Pan-African Parliament. Once you are not engaging the Pan-African Parliament, the African Parliament, you are not engaging people of Africa. Why not African Union have the same common plan with Pan-African Parliament in this regard and working together, synergizing our efforts so that we will be more effective and efficient. I didn't see during my stay in the office any activity which we have done together with the African Union Commission in this matter. And also, in the regard of xenophobia, we are having different reports. From African Union Commission, we heard that the attack was xenophobic in South Africa, but the government of South Africa is saying it was not xenophobic. So where is the fact? Why not you send a fact-finding mission together with the Pan-African Parliament and give us a true image for the people of Africa? We need to work together. We need to synergize everything. Otherwise, we are going in different directions. We can do nothing. We can achieve nothing. So we need to avoid all these confusions. We need to know, to have the true picture regarding this matter. In African soil, we should not have such type of attack. We don't afford. We know South Africa during apartheid time, all Africa, we were behind them. We worked together. We assisted them. I don't think this time South Africa should be the country where Africans can be attacked. So we need to partner.
Gracias por su intervención.
Thank you very much.
Le doy la palabra.
And now I give the floor to
Tiene la palabra el
Honorable Ignacine Mialurundo from Rwanda.
Je vous remercie, Madame la
I
Présidente.
thank you, Madam Vice President.
Je dis merci à Madame
I'd like to
l'ambassadrice pour
thank
son
the
exposé.
Excellency,
C'est bien.
Her Excellency
Ça
the
reflète ce que
Ambassador.
fait l'Union
It reflects
africaine.
what the African Union
Mais,
is,
c'est pas assez.
African Union's endeavors, but this
Je
is
pense
not
que l'Afrique
enough. I
doit
think that
arriver à
Africa should
imposer,
manage
des mesures
to
pour la prévention.
impose preventive
Si je
measures.
donne des propositions,
Let me make
il
some
faut
proposals in
arriver
this
à
respect. We need
à
to
responsabiliser les chefs d'État en tant
have to be
qu'individus.
able to
S'il s'agit des sanctions, que ces
impose the
sanctions se dirigent
accountability
vers
on our
la
heads of states
vers
as
les groupes
individuals.
qui n'arrivent pas à respecter
And
les droits humains, parce que les droits
those
humains
on those who
sont
do not
universels,
respect
ils
human
sont
rights,
obligés.
because human rights are
Alors, j'interpelle
universal
la justice
rights.
africaine,
Therefore, I
s'il y
call
en a,
upon the
que
African
ces dirigeants
justice,
soient traduits
if
devant
any,
la
that these
justice,
heads of
sans que
states be
sans
brought
que
before
la
justice
population soit
without
concernée.
involving the
Deuxième chose,
populations.
J'interpelle la
Secondly, let me call upon
de
the
justice et des droits humains
Commission
du
on
PAC
Justice and
que
Human
le
Rights
droit
of the
à la
Pan-African
protection des réfugiés
Parliament
soit
on
révolu.
that
Il ne faut pas qu'un
on the
groupe
issue of
soit cantonné
refugees.
dans un autre pays, alors que d'autres populations, d'autres
When
groupes
we are in a
sont à
country,
l'aise dans leur pays. Il faut que les dirigeants, les gouvernants arrivent à
Leaders
protéger tout le
should
monde sur le même
protect
continent
all the
et dans leur
populations
pays.
on the
Je vous
continent,
remercie.
even the refugees that are on their territories. I thank you.
Gracias por su intervención.
Thank you very
Ahora tiene
much.
la palabra el honorable
Now I give the floor to Ahmed Ul-Sidi de Mauritania.
¿No se encuentra en la sala?
It seems that he is not here, present. Therefore, I'd like to give the floor to Honorable Guyi Christian Utsago from Gabon.
Tiene la palabra.
You have the floor.
No se encuentra en la sala también.
Not present.
Tiene la palabra el Diallo Cante.
I give the floor to Diad Kante from Guinea-Conakry.
Tiene la palabra.
You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Vice President.
Madame la Vice-Présidente, je m'étais inscrit par rapport
I wanted to take the floor actually to react on the report.
d'une part,
to react on the reports on the one hand
par rapport à un
and
certain nombre de questions que je me
to
pose.
raise a number of questions. The presentations that have been made by Her Excellency the Ambassador addressed the concerns I had, and I would like to congratulate her on the way she presented her report. And as she just gave us another proof that if women are empowered, they are competent and skillful.
Gracias por su intervención. Y ahora tiene la palabra.
And now I give the floor to Victory Beati of Guinea-Bissau.
De Guinea-Bissau. No está.
Thank you, President.
Yes, I am,
Obrigada,
ma'am.
Senhora Presidente.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Madam Vice President,
Acompanhar a intervenção
honestly, as I was listening to the intervention of Ambassador Diallo about the situation of peace and security in our continent, made me cringe, and I believe that everyone else felt the same way. Madam, I believe that the problem in the African continent is due to the fact that we are men, we are human beings, and we are human beings and we are males. And if we look at certain countries in our continent, we have had some women at their leadership. But if we look at when democracy was implemented in those countries, and if we look at when did we have women as leaders of rebellions and conflict? Never, I would say. Only men. As men are to blame. Madam, I believe that as Africans we learned the democracy from the Western world, and we learned it very quickly, especially us, the men. The African man, when he takes power, he then becomes totally different, and that it makes our process much more complex. Which country in our continent does not have an internal problem? There is no country that is able to solve its own problems. Some maybe, but I believe that we should learn the best practices so that we can all live in peace and security. If we do not do it, we will not be able to do that. How many children are displaced, are refugees outside of their own country of birth? What is the hope that we can give these children in our continent? It is very sad, very unfortunate. But truly, Africa, when the African Union was established, we know that that was proof that the men that created that organization, they believed in men. But since then, we have not done much. We have become worse. Even with the efforts of those who continue to protect the principles of that organization, we have still not managed to improve. And that is why we need to become strongly united. And as parliamentarians,
thank you. Now I give the floor to Senyo Botale from Botswana.
Thank you very much. And I wanted to take this opportunity in this inaugural speech of mine to associate myself fully with the words uttered and sentiments shared by Madam Ambassador on renewed political will. I believe that this current crop of members of parliament of the Pan-African Parliament should be at the forefront of calling for reform in our own countries. I want to stress and buttress this point that charity begins at home. We cannot be speaking about any solution whatsoever in Africa if we do not preach the need for democratic reforms in the very countries that we represent. I wanted to say that let this crop of members of parliament be the ones that when they heard the cries of poor African people who die every day in seas trying to look for better lives, let us be those members of parliament who chose the side of those poor people, not the side of our governments, even though we know they are not doing the right thing. Let the Pan-African Parliament be active. Let this parliament be the conduit through which the dreams and aspirations of our people are transferred to our governments and are transferred to the mother body, the AU, through very clearly articulated policies, clearly articulated mechanisms of democracy. Let us, as the Pan-African Parliament, entrench democratic ideals in our continent. Let us, as a parliament, take a very active role in building strong institutions in our countries, not strong men. I wanted to end by also talking about unity and reiterating the need for unity. Let us learn, Africans, to learn together as to hang together as brothers and sisters in our mother continent. Because if we do not hang together, we'll continue hanging separately in the misery of poverty, in the misery of chronic and institutionalized corruption and the resultant poor governance. I thank you.
Gracias. Thank you. Now I give the floor to Honorable Swati Al-Fada Badi of Sudan.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you, Madam Vice.
In the name of God, the compassionate and the merciful.
I want to thank also Madam Amina for her
Allow me also to thank Her Excellency Amina Diallo for her presentation. And if we look at the report, there are some questions that come to mind. The first is that most of the wars, conflicts, and terrorist attacks occur in Africa.
Was said about 7 years ago.
The latest conflict we've seen dates back to this year. And this conflict weakens Africa on a political, economic, and social level.
This is hindering the cycle of development in our continent.
Hinders the development of our continent.
A number of conflicts and wars are associated with Islam, the peaceful religion that calls for unity, fraternity, and brotherhood. The force of the version is that most of those people who are leading these wars appeared suddenly fully armed. The question is, who is arming them and why against Africa with all its poverty and longing for a better life? Who are the real beneficiaries of this? Number 5, the fifth, why is it that Africa is always the victim? Is it a process of evacuation and reinstating? I think we have to think more fully and seriously about this. The problem is not, the solution is not in democracy. Never democracy will bring peace. It helps, but it will not bring peace. Democracy that manufactures weapons and fill our land with these weapons and give it to these terrorists is not our choice now. The problem is very complicated. And unless we are united against the real kindlers of wars and shut them out of our land, the march towards peace and development will never be attained. Lastly, Madam,
yes, Professor, go ahead.
I just want to comment on my colleague from Bissau, from Guinea-Bissau, who said, never women, never lead revolutions. Women are always behind these revolutions. They kindle it, they lead it, not now, since the pharaohs, since 6,000 years ago, women are on the run, and women are fighting for the liberty of their land, and their children, and themselves, and their honor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I give the floor to the Honorable Elsie Lum from Chad.
Thank you very much, President. I have listened very closely to the presentation made, and I take this opportunity to commend the clarity with which Her Excellency Abana Diallo presented the report on peace and security in Africa. I have some comments and also some questions. Your Excellency Ambassador, while I appreciate your report, I somehow have some outstanding issues that I would like to raise. I take note that this rather states the facts, and I understand that your position as a diplomat prevents you from dealing with some issues more frankly. So this status of peace and security in Africa gave us an idea, an overview of the situation prevailing currently on our continent. In my opinion, it would be wise to analyze and to present the deep-seated causes of conflict in Africa. This is not only linked to a deficit of democracy, as the chairperson of the Committee on Cooperation said, but also other social, economic, and religious factors. And I would like to focus on the religious aspect of this issue, as was already raised by some of my colleagues who spoke before me. Let me talk about Boko Haram, that you also included in some paragraphs, as well as the decisions taken by the Peace and Security Council during its 444th meeting.
Monsieur le Président, je m'adresse pas seulement à Madame
President,
l'ambassadeur, mais je voudrais
not
que
only
nous,
speaking to
députés,
Her Excellency
comme
the
cela a
Ambassador, but
été
also
évoqué
to our
tantôt,
members of Parliament. And
la
as was said earlier,
transformation
we
de
call
l'aspect
for
religieux du
the
conflit
transformation
est un gros
of the
problème.
religious aspect of
Je voudrais
conflict,
qu'on prenne
as
conscience
this
de
is a
cette
big
ramification
problem,
de la
and we
secte
have to
nébuleuse
take
Boko
heed
Haram,
of the ramifications
qui ne
of
va pas
Boko
aujourd'hui se
Haram,
limiter seulement dans
which
le
is
pays
not
du lac
only
Tchad,
limited to the
mais qui
countries
va
neighboring the Lake
s'étendre
Chad, but also
de la sous-région de
beyond
Tchad.
and the whole
Aujourd'hui, nous
sub-region.
de nos chefs d'État,
Today,
envoyer les forces
our heads of state have deployed the armed forces, and they have launched attacks against Boko Haram in the east. I'm speaking from my position as Chad, in the east and the west. And this situation was soon supported by Cameroon, Niger, and Benin. And today, you learned about an attack by Boko Haram against Nigerian officers who have been taken hostage and killed. And luckily, some of them were also released. Chad is today hosting thousands of displaced people around Lake Chad. Attacks continue and serious human rights violations. I think it does not suffice to send an intervention force. The problem is much deeper. Every day we hear about more and more violence, and it affects us and those countries. It would be more wise to set up a mechanism for the prevention of crisis instead of intervening afterwards and employing intervention forces. This prevention mechanism, Your Excellency, the Ambassador, is often raised here when we debate the issues of peace and security, and we would sincerely like you to report on this in your meetings as you are chairperson of the Peace and Security Council for this month, and we count on you to focus on the establishment of a mechanism for the prevention of conflict. I referred to the issue of Boko Haram in these 3 minutes, but we hope we'll have the opportunity to address this problem in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I give the floor to the Honorable David Moyenga from Burkina Faso.
Merci, Monsieur le
Thank you
Président.
very much, President.
Le peuple insurgé
The
contre le refus
people
de
outraged
l'alternance
against the
vous salue
refusal
et salue
of
votre auguste
change
assemblée.
of power.
Salue Madame l'ambassadrice.
We commend your august assembly. We commend Her Excellency the Ambassador
brillante,
for her brilliant
qui montre
presentation,
clairement
which clearly
l'aggravation et la diversification des
represents
conflits
the
en Afrique.
diverse aspects of conflict on the
Mais
African
nous pensons
continent.
que
But we consider
la vraie question,
that
la question
the
fondamentale,
fundamental
le phénomène
issue,
qu'il convient de cerner
phenomenon
actuellement en Afrique,
that we
c'est
have
la
to
question de la
pinpoint in
mauvaise
Africa
gouvernance.
is the issue of
La
poor
question du
governance,
tripatouillage des
the
constitutions
question of
africaines pour
tinkering
s'éterniser
with the
au
African
pouvoir. C'est de ça qu'il
constitutions
s'agit.
to remain in power.
Les
This is
peuples
what it is
africains
about.
aujourd'hui
The people of
sont en train de
Africa
s'élever
today are
pour
standing
contrecarrer
up to
tout ce
counter
qu'il y a comme éternisation au niveau
all
des pouvoirs. Et
attempts
l'Union
to
africaine
cling to power,
devrait cerner
and the African
l'évolution des
Union
phénomènes
must
politiques africains.
take hold
L'Union
of this
africaine ne doit pas être
situation.
en retard.
African Union
Sinon, de
should
toute
not
façon,
lag behind.
les peuples vont se
Otherwise, the people
Les peuples
will
vont s'insurger.
take,
Et les peuples
stand
vont
up. They
imposer la démocratie aux
will
institutions si elles
impose
ne le font pas.
democracy upon the institutions.
De mon point
The
de vue,
leaders don't do that. And from my point
je
of
pense que
view,
le cas
I
du Burkina
consider
a été
that
une école.
the example of Burkina
Et
Faso
l'Union africaine devrait vraiment s'en inspirer.
is something that should be
Le
of
cas du
inspiration
Burundi,
to other
pourquoi il n'y a pas eu
countries.
de fermeté? Voilà,
Why
en termes de
is the
prévention,
situation as
ce que
such
nous
in
pensons
Burundi?
sur ces genres de questions au niveau africain.
What we
Il
consider
doit y avoir
an
de la prévention
African
en commençant par la
continent,
fermeté
we should have
des
enough
institutions
open
africaines.
space.
S'il y avait eu une fermeté au Burkina,
And
est-ce qu'on
if
en
there
serait là?
was
S'il y avait eu une fermeté au
more
niveau du Burundi,
actions
et que c'est
in
encore, il y a encore
Burundi
d'autres pays
and many other
où souvent
countries
les élections sont vite faites
where we
et
see
vite
very
validées
often
pour pouvoir
elections
éviter,
take place
l'Union africaine doit
hastily
prendre
and they
le
are
devant de la
validated.
situation. Et de
But
ce
no,
point
the
de vue,
African
en
Union
ce qui
must
concerne le
anticipate,
le
and
pape
as
doit
for the Pan-African Parliament,
effectivement redresser
Parliament
l'orientation de l'Union africaine sur ces
rechart the
sujets-là.
course of the African Union on these issues, and this is how the Pan-African Parliament can fully play its role. And the debate that will take place on the report of the committee will indeed have to deal with these issues, which will enable us to save face in the African continent.
Le fait que, à notre avis,
in our opinion, the African Union must also sanction perpetrators. It's good to take stock. It's good to intervene.
Thank you very much. And now we'll give the floor to the Honorable Suleiman Sise from Sierra Leone.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I thank Madam Diallo for the beautiful paper she presented. Peace and security in Africa is hanging on us like an albatross. The question I pose is, where did all this start? What is the genesis of conflict in Africa? The answer I put in the hands of our colonial masters. The way independence was granted to us was on a false premise. It started in Togo when the first president, Sylvanus Olympio, was overthrown in a coup. That was the president. That was the start of all coups in Africa. That power should come from the barrel of the gun and not from the ballot. In 1963, when President Kennedy came into power, he assembled the best brains in America to advise him on the future of America. A report was published, and the title of that report was The Report from the Iron Mountains. And the conclusion of that report is that war is a necessary tool for America to advance. If you go to the archives or the libraries, the book is there, and that the American machinery, war machinery, should be galvanized, and that every 2-3 years, America was going into conflict. That is happening. Mr. President, colleague MPs, where are the weapons terrorists use come from? Who is benefiting from the conflict? These weapons were not manufactured in Lagos, Nairobi, or Accra. They are manufactured in Europe, Russia, France, the US, and Canada. How are they transported? Africa, wake up. Brothers, wake up. The overthrow of Gaddafi created a lot of problems for us in Africa. Last but not least, Ebola. Thank God, Ebola is on the run. Sierra Leone, Liberia, Guinea suffered a whole lot. The Pan-African Parliament promised to create an Ebola fund. Up to this minute, up to $4,000 hasn't been collected. Up to this minute, we haven't collected $4,000 on the Ebola fund to help Sierra Leone, Guinea, and Liberia. All we do is talk, talk, talk. Mr. President, you are leaving. The Ebola fund is hanging out there. Nothing is in there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that reminds me that this parliament agreed to make a, we're not very rich here. We're poor parliamentarians of a poor continent. So, but we must also sacrifice one way or another. We had agreed to make donations to the Ebola Fund as members of parliament. Please, contributions are welcome before the end of the session. I thank you. And now we'll give the floor to the Honorable Mayor Ali Siro from Ethiopia.
شكرا سيد الرئيس. أود أن أشكر المقدمة عن تقرير ممتاز عن حالة السلم والأمن في أفريقيا.
I would like to thank Her Excellency the Ambassador who reported on the situation of peace and security in Africa. Peace and security are the foundations of prosperity and development, and it is claimed by our people. This also requires from us to work together, to be united. Our continent has become a hotbed, a refuge for terrorism, and those who do not even respect our ancient civilizations. In Nigeria, Boko Haram is committing terrible atrocities, and in Somalia, the Shabab is also committing heinous crimes. And they have done so for many years. The latest was in Garissa in Kenya. Hundreds of students were slain by this group. And Daesh also, the Islamic State, as it claims to be, commits vile crimes against innocents in Libya. We've also seen people beheaded, Ethiopians, Egyptians. We saw this on our TV screens. And as for this group, Daesh, the fact of killing people is for them a marketing campaign. They behead, they burn people alive, they throw people from the cliffs without any respect for their lives, without any pity. Africa must stand united to deal with this issue and to arrest it. We should also work hand in hand with countries combating terrorism in the Middle East and elsewhere in the world. President, ladies and gentlemen, in order to tackle terrorism, we should also deal with the origins of terrorism, corruption, poor governance, underdevelopment, the non-respect for human rights. If this is done, then we will see peace and security on our continent. Here we're talking about a united Africa. In this chamber, what we're seeing in South Africa, for example, which is the country of a great African, Nelson Mandela. We see these unacceptable xenophobic attacks. We should work with the government of South Africa so that this will never occur again. Thank you, President.
Thank you very much. And I give the floor to Honorable Mamedi Sidibe from Mali.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, President. Thank you to Her Excellency, the Ambassador, for the brilliant report she presented to us. I would also like to thank all the countries who contributed so that peace announced since the 15th of May become a reality in our country. We thank the international solidarity, African solidarity, and regional solidarity. We particularly commend the countries who have paid a heavy price in the name of solidarity with African countries to bring peace to Mali, in particular Chad, Niger, Senegal, Burkina Faso, and so many other countries that have made heavy sacrifices so that peace can be restored in Mali. But we will only know peace in Mali if we involve all the African institutions, if they are very strongly engaged, and particularly support the latest communique of the Peace and Security Council, and I quote, the Peace and Security Council in its communique of its last meeting devoted to the situation in Mali showed its determination to take appropriate measures against all whose actions could compromise the peace process in Mali. In my opinion, this communique must be strongly supported by a motion of the representatives of African states that we are as members of the Pan-African Parliament, and a motion on this situation in Mali so that this communique can indeed be upheld by the Pan-African Parliament. When a person carrying a weapon comes here and forces us to do something, we will follow. Well, that is the situation we see in Mali. In fact, those who today claim to persist. They only represent 1% of our population. But if an armed man storms into the parliament and asks us to do something, well, we will do it. And that's why all the Malians, 99.9% of the Malians from the north are Malians, but it's with arms that we force them to act. We thank the international community, France, although France is outside Africa, France has also paid a heavy price and contributed to bring peace to Mali.
Thank you very much, and I give the floor to the Honorable Aissatou Sow Diawara from Senegal.
Merci, Président.
Thank you very much, President.
Je commence par féliciter
At the outset,
Madame
let me congratulate Her Excellency Amina Diallo for her sterling presentation, which enlightened us about the hotbeds of insecurity and tension on our continent. We know what are the causes of these conflicts: poor governance, tinkering with our constitutions, the non-respect of our documents, the uneven distribution of resources, poverty, the non-respect of the rules of democracy. In short, we should be made aware among Africans, those who come to power after being in opposition forget the causes of their struggles, and they make the same errors as those they replace. So we need to see a change of behavior in Africa to strengthen a political will. Thank you, President.
Thank you very much. And I give the floor to the Honorable Professor Elamin Dafala El Cid.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I would like to commend the report, which is presented with Madame Diallo, which is from the Peace and Security Council of AU. But, Mr. President, I would like to go back to last May, the same time, when the Peace and Security presented, from the AU presented a report about peace and security in Africa. Comparing that report with this report, we find that the number of cases of insecurity or instability in Africa increased a lot. And now, I remember also last time, after that report was presented, there was discussion in this parliament, and then there was that everybody asked for deployment forces to intervene in Africa, and these deployment forces should be made by the African Union. My question, what happened to that? The second thing is that there was a mention also that there is a scarcity of money so that the AU and even the PAP cannot do the work because there is no funds for that. And I'm in the Committee of Peace and Cooperation. We cannot move around. We cannot send fact-finding missions to anywhere because there is no money. And I think this is very important because any report from Peace and Security Committee will be the base for any solution. Mr. President, the lady, the Honorable Madam, did not mention anything in her report about Darfur. Because, thank God, Darfur is now living peacefully. And due to that peaceful situation, election is run everywhere in Sudan, particularly in Darfur, with a big turnout in Darfur, everywhere, without exception, with no single violence in any one of the cases. But amazingly, the chairperson of the cooperation mentioned Darfur in his report in the comment. We, in Peace and Security, we didn't mention anything about that in the meeting of the 15th of May when we discussed peace and security in Africa. And I think Darfur now is living peacefully at every part of Sudan. This is due to the effort made by the AU and peace and security and due to the effort of our government. We thank God for that, and we would like all countries to live in peace and would like to see peace availing everywhere. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I give the floor to the Honorable Said Ntanda from Tanzania.
Mheshimiwa Rais, nakushukuru kwa kunipa nafasi niweze kusema
thank you very much for giving me the place so that I can speak about the report that has been presented by him. I congratulate, just as my colleagues have been saying about the report, but at the same time, there are three things that have been presented in the report which is important for us as parliamentarians. There are many causes of this these conflicts, and there's this poverty which is to them. Youth are just very few leaders in Africa who are enriching themselves, and then they have taken even half of the richness of the country. And how do you expect that country in Africa that there will be no conflicts or war? It is very important that the national resources should be used for the benefits of our people and also to eradicate poverty. Once there is no poverty, once we reduce poverty in Africa, there will be few conflicts in Africa. Residents, there is no employment for it. And not many countries have taken steps in order to address this question of unemployment for youth. Many governments always promise to happen, but there are no conducive conditions so that these youth can employ themselves in agriculture and also give them loans so that they can fight against poverty. I really thank the staffing community and Dr. Tinana for the steps that they have taken in face of the conflict in Britain. Tanzania is usually affected by conflicts in the Great Lakes. We always receive many refugees. The recent conflict, we have more than 100,000 refugees in Tanzania. The government of Tanzania would like to see that the African Union and the Peace and Security Council take necessary steps to make sure that there is peace in Africa, and that the Burundians in Africa return to their countries so that they can continue to develop and the economy. Honorable President, Excellency Mr. President, and myself, I call upon our government that during colonial times, many people in Africa were exploited in Africa. But now, given that we have poverty, these youth have become now they become slaves in Europe. It is not good for African countries. We should take steps so that our youth remain in their countries and be productive in their countries. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, and I give the floor to the Honorable Zalikato Diallo from Guinea.
Thank you, Mr. President. In turn, allow me to congratulate Ambassador Diallo for the quality of her presentation, especially because she gave us an overview as a chairperson of the Council for Peace and Security on what pertains on the African continent, the current threats, and so on. However, we note that we are confronted with a great number of challenges. First of all, we are looking at the issue of conflict prevention. I think we will continue to insist on the importance of the role of the African Union, because prevention is better than managing conflicts at a later stage. And I think managing and sorting out these conflicts sometimes does cost enormous amounts of money, and yet that money could have been devoted to developing our countries. And that is in line with the 2063 vision of the African Union, reason for which I think we need to prevent these conflicts, to help us make progress and implement projects that are much more beneficial for our people. Because my take is that we need to tackle the problem of weapons merchants, because they are the ones that are fueling the conflicts in our countries. So we need to persevere and make sure that we work towards achieving much better results. Secondly, the issue of the Libyan situation, because the current political and economic situation in Libya does remain something that disturbs the entire continent, and we need to make sure that we come up with measures that we sort out these problems, because sometimes we have to deal also with the problem with the migrants who are being exploited by unscrupulous traffickers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I give the floor to the Honorable Soumaïla Cissé from Mali.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, allow me to congratulate Ambassador Diallo for the sterling presentation she made and thank her for giving us an overview of the situation. Let me tackle 3 items. First of all, Libya. My take is that despite the reports that we have listened to, it will be important that we also mention the role of the international community and what brought about the terrorists in Mali, drug trafficking, hostage-taking, and more recently, what is happening in the Mediterranean Sea, where hundreds, if not thousands of youth are dying. I think it would be proper that we recap on the history so that we know exactly the origin of this crisis. And in preparing these reports, I think we have to bear in mind the very important role that ISIS plays. We see as well what has happened in Kenya, which we deplore, and a number of young people who were slaughtered coldly in Ethiopia, and the problems that are bedeviling Iraq and the Levant. I think it is important that we note that the international community, whether it be in the case of Mali, that we also reflect that in the document. But we are witnessing something that is new. Boko Haram that has now declared that its allegiance to the Islamic State. That means that everything becomes really so nebulous. And then, Madam Chairperson, and also my words are addressed to the ambassador, because we went across African countries under the umbrella of the African Union to witness a number of observations of electoral missions. And I think that is important that we mention that, because a report was prepared. What happened to that report? Why send a mission when the result of that mission is not taken into account? So I think factors are there for us to work with, and therefore I think we need to tackle them accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will now give the floor to Abdul Samad Mohammed Hassan, Honorable Member from Somalia.
Thanks, Mr. President. Let me first say thanks to the Ambassador, the Chairperson, for the good presentation. Let me also add to my voice to this presentation, this report. On page 3, paragraph 4, I'd like to add some voice in there. The sentence says, in Somalia, AMISOM and the Somali National Army have successfully conducted joint operation under the code name Eagle and the Indian Ocean, which has resulted in reception of first zone of the Al-Shabaab terrorist group that is seeking to extend its action to other countries in the Horn of Africa. Mr. President, the Al-Shabaab group is not only seeking to be in Horn of Africa. I would like to call the recognition of Council of Peace of Security of Africa to recognize Al-Shabaab terrorists is not only targeting Horn of Africa, they are also targeting in global, and it has to be recognized that it's a global terrorist. The second thing, Mr. President, I would like to see in this report, which I cannot see that, the all terrorist group in Africa, they being financed outside of our continent. I don't even see any report that shows any activities related to how and where they can get that finance. Mr. President, I cannot be silent to what's going on in Burundi. The Pan-African Parliament and the African Union must come the solution where the people of Burundi are fleeing in neighboring country as a refugee. We cannot sit and watch. We have to come out with a solution. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'd like to give the floor to the Honorable Martin Bohé from Côte d'Ivoire.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, sir, having listened to the overview of the situation made by Mrs. Amina Djibo Diallo, I note two items that bear importance in the crisis that bedevil the continent: religious problems, matters relating to governance, and also crises that are of a non-armed type, but that are insidious nonetheless, including various epidemics, and to name but a few, the Ebola epidemic. I think since March 2014, 15 months down the line, thanks to the international mobilization and the goodwill of various countries, including the developed one, this epidemic is now coming slowly under control. But that is not the case with the violent armed conflicts that are on the continent that were originally nourished by various antagonistic blocs and the advent of globalization, where we see that these problems then arise in various African countries. So why so many armed conflicts in Africa? Why do they persist? And for which we accuse the lack of democracy, good governance, and political will on the part of the international community. Why is it, therefore, Ambassador, that the Peace and Security Council has not yet activated Article 6F of the protocol to put into motion the reduction of crises across the African continent? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I give the floor to the Honorable Awad Haj Ali from Sudan. Professor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President's report has reflected the disappointment of the AU about the situation in South Sudan. We are the people of Sudan more disappointed and very sad to observe our common blood relatives in South Sudan killing each other in tribal basis. The number of killed people in the short age of the newly born country is much more than those had been killed during the 60 years of conflict before separation. That's because the fighting at that time was between the SPLA and the army. The common people are not involved. Most of the affected people of South Sudan, as you know, had moved to North Sudan. But and they are living safely in Sudan till now. As presented in the report, nearly half of the population of South Sudan, around 4 million, are in great need to human help and 1.3 million are displaced is an important lesson to Africa that separation and division of African countries complicates the problem and not solves the problem. Division will lead to more divisions. The solution is in the close follow-up and observation of the implementation of the charters of human rights, democracy, election, governance, inclusion, that will lead to fair share of power and development. Mr. President, I fully support the effort of the AU to speed up the implementation of the cooperation accord of the September 2012, that is the 4 freedoms between the Sudan and North and South Sudan. That will repeat the success story of the East Community commended by President Hiro during his speech that day. Finally, I would like to reflect my surprise for the comment I heard from the chairperson of the cooperation about Darfur, despite the fact that Darfur problem now is a history, and for six sessions reports of the AU was not presented. I don't know what is the reference on that case. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you. May I now give the floor to the Honorable Salom Sise from Guinea-Conakry. Should not hear. I now give the floor to the Honorable Tandi Cecilia Memela from South Africa.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Peace and security is a condition which enables development, good governance, rule of law, democracy, and human rights to blossom. And I would say congratulations to our Ambassador, Madam Amina, for your report. Well, the other members have actually pointed out some of the gray areas within it, and I hope it will be corrected in due time. While I appreciate progress made in bringing peace in many parts of our continent, and they've been mentioned, I really am against terrorism, human trafficking of women and children, the high rate of our people dying in those overloaded boats because they're looking for greener pastures. With Burundi, I would say, what history are we trying to write about our continent, Africa? Thousands of children are left to die of hunger. They are orphans. They have no proper housing. The women are running around looking for something to feed those children. And yet our continent is still not recognizing the power of women. Let's try and eradicate the greed of power. And let's try and recognize those women who have sacrificed for decades to be in the forefront of these conflicts. I then say, Honorable Fateh Al-Badr, you know that we've always said one Africa, one voice. Let's try our best to ensure that our every year
Thank you, Honourable Member. Thank you very much. And I give the floor to the Honourable Ignace Ndebo Akanda from the Democratic Republic of Congo.
Honorable President, je vous remercie de la parole que vous m'accordez.
Thank you for recognizing me.
Honorable Président, j'ai
Mr. President, I have made sure that I'm going to allocate 2.5 minutes to my statement. So please don't cut me off. It is difficult, Mr. President, to take the floor when you come in at number 43 out of 50 speakers, having listened to a number of brilliant presentations, some more brilliant than others. But nonetheless, Mr. President, I want to add my voice to all those who spoke before me to congratulate Ambassador Diallo for the brilliant presentation that she made, and which is replete with good lessons for Africa. Mr. President, I wanted to speak about the origin of funding for the sophisticated war arsenal that we find across the continent. But let me remind ourselves that Mr. Suna from Niger and Mr. Lahai from Sierra Leone and others have already spoken at length and eloquently on the various topics. Yesterday, Mr. President, we were fighting against slavery and the oppression of blacks by whites. Today, we are going through neo-colonialism and the massacre of blacks by blacks. So what are we to take from that? In the light of all this, I have heard and with great emotion, our colleague from Sierra Leone, Kanag Barrow, spoke, speaking about the word unity. But for me, I would like to address myself to the ambassador so that we underline the word justice. Because, Mr. President, there can be no development, no genuine development without justice. Because a justice that is required of the positive dictatorship of the respect for law. Therefore, Mr. Chairman, we want to make sure that all these weaknesses are crimes against humanity. And these crimes are crimes that we cannot describe, because the authors of all these massacres, of all this pain, of all this suffering, I think all these have to be held to account for their acts, because enough is enough. And I would also like to address myself to the ambassador.
Monsieur le Président, je vous avais demandé de ne pas me couper parce que mon intervention était de 2 minutes 54 secondes. Vous m'en avez fait perdre 10 secondes parce qu'on m'a interrompu. Bref, et donc, je voudrais également l'intention de Madame l'ambassadrice suggérer que toutes ces infractions soient insérées dans le cadre de la justice, dans les mécanismes d'extradition, afin que les auteurs et tout le reste soient traduits devant les instances judiciaires compétentes. Enfin, je voudrais demander, Monsieur le Président, à Madame l'ambassadrice d'être également l'ambassadrice du Parlement, de manière que le Parlement,
so that the voice of the Pan-African Parliament, because we've heard how talented she is,
nous lui déposons les fleurs,
I think we all want to congratulate her once more for the quality of her speech. But we want her to speak on our behalf and plead the cause of our institution and our chamber, so that the Pan-African Parliament...
véritable pouvoir légiférer et de contrôle. Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much. And I give the floor to the Honorable Abdulaziz Abdullahi Mohammed.
1, 2. Now, those were live visuals from the Pan-African Parliament, as you saw there in Midrand, where the MPs are debating the peace and security on the continent of Africa. Now, the situation in Burundi, as you heard there, Nigeria, as well as the xenophobic attacks here in South Africa, were all part and parcel and featured during the discussion there. So we will take a break and we'll be right back after that.
Professor killed. And from there in Africa, we have all types of insecurity. But now I would like to come to the point and the issue of terrorism in our continent. Unless we address the issue of radicalization, the issue of radicalization and tackle it properly, it will be difficult for us to solve or to find a solution, lasting solution to this matter. In fact, it is good reference and worth to note that a portion of the President Uhuru Kenyatta's speech covered on how important it is to tackle the issue of radicalization in our continent. Terrorism begins with radicalization, and it doesn't begin with explosions and missions carried out by Al-Shabaab or Boko Haram or any other organization. These young men and women who engage these activities, they do go through a process of brainwashing. So at this first stage, before they cause damage or harm to our societies, we need to stop them there. Therefore, it's important to identify through intelligence network who are these financiers or who are these individuals or organizations behind these activities, or where are the locations, where are they? All these things are very important for us to tackle this radicalization or terrorism in our continent. Mr. President, to carry out a military operations, according to the report from, by the ambassador, to carry out military operations against terrorism alone will not solve the Somali conflict. Somalia needs full political support, financial support. We spend a lot of money, international community spend a lot of money on Somalia, and very little amount of this money goes to the hands of the Somali government.
Thank you very much. And I will give the floor to the Honorable Asmana Malam Issa from Niger.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. In turn, let me say that I can only congratulate Her Excellency Ambassador Diallo, who spoke both in perfect English and just as eloquent French, and allowed to enrich our discourse. I think you shared with us very encouraging information with regard to the situation in Burkina Faso, where there was a revolution which cost a number of human lives, and the problem of the elections in Nigeria, where we were all very worried, but they ended up being some of the most democratically organized elections in Africa, and also the progress that has been made in fighting against Ebola. So progress is there, and we welcome it. But we are worried about Burundi, we are worried about Boko Haram, and we are worried about Libya, and I think it is also proper that we worry about the Sahrawi Republic, because what efforts are being made with regard to that country. Burundi, the president has just signed a decree to postpone the elections. So what are we to do to change things in Burundi? For Boko Haram, heads of state yesterday had mobilized to try and tackle this worrisome problem, and to try and get organized and fight Boko Haram as one, as Africa. so that we stop this macabre slaughter of the people of Nigeria. And then Libya is also something that has got implications in Mali, Chad, and in the rest of the sub-region, as well as in the Mediterranean Sea, and the problems of migration to Europe. And I wanted to raise this matter because I think it is a matter that pertains to the youth. What is happening in Burkina Faso is a problem that regards the youth, and also what's happening in Nigeria, where Boko Haram abducts young people. Why? How are we going to try and fight against illegal migration? I think we need to be proactive. We need to make sure that African countries, the African Union, are proactive so that they take measures to ensure that there is development and create employment for the youth. Because to try and tell a young person not to travel at his own risk, at the risk of his life, to cross the sea in search of work, because if there is hope that they can find jobs in Africa, these youth, I think, I'm going to stay on African soil. And we need to carry out sensitization missions in the framework of the Agenda 2063. This is not for me because I'm old now.
Thank you very much. And I give the floor to the Honorable Sinaya Ahmedna from Sahrawi Arab Republic.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
In the name of
أنا
Allah,
أريد
I
على
would
قرار
like
زملائي أن أهني السيدة السفيرة
to congratulate Her Excellency the Ambassador on her brilliant presentation. And I'm wondering
سقوط أو عدم إدراج
about why the struggle of the Sahrawi people and the conflict in Western Sahara is not included or incorporated in this report, despite the fact that there are many reasons, despite the fact that this conflict has been lasting for 40 years now, and the whole international community agrees that this is a struggle for independence, for self-determination, and this be at the level of the United Nations or the African Union. Besides, the efforts, highly appreciated efforts made by the African Union, be it at the level of the heads of state or the Peace and Security Council. Despite all these, and despite the sufferings and hardships of the Sahrawi people, the sufferings of the refugees who work in the camps, who have been living in the camps for more than 40 years. So, with regard to this situation and all these details, it would have been desirable and advisable to incorporate this conflict and to go into details. Another item I would like to raise, and I would call upon all my colleagues and to support me to support the Sahrawis seeking diplomatic and political solutions, and also to support the endeavors of the African Union in seeking peaceful solutions. I would like that a recommendation be made by the Parliament, by the Pan-African Parliament, to support and encourage and express our solidarity with the African Union Commission and the Peace and Security Council of the African Union in their efforts aiming at seeking peaceful solutions to the conflict in Western Sahara. Thank you.
مشروع اللائحة موجود.
The draft recommendation is here. I do have it already.
Thank you very much. And I give the floor to the Honorable Nasiru Amadou from Niger. He's not here. I give the floor to the Honorable Seko Fantamadi Traore from Mali. Starting chamber. I now give the floor to the Honorable Vice President, Honorable Dr. Ashibe Gayo from Ethiopia.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm done already.
Oh, you spoke while I was away. Thank you. Let me now give the floor to the Honorable Nkurunziza from Burundi.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President, for the opportunity. I would like to echo what has been said by my colleagues to congratulate Madame Diallo on her brilliant presentation and highly appreciate the position of the African Union about Burundi. We do appreciate as well the high-level missions that have been sent to Burundi. Currently, the situation is improving, and elections or contacts are underway and elections postponed. We would like as well to call upon our colleagues and be wise and sensitive to all positions, because we should not have extreme positions and stances and also condemn the position of the African Union and the African heads of states on coups. These positions run the risk of dividing us and fuel conflicts in Africa. I would like to thank all the countries and the speakers who have been sensitive to what's happening in Burundi and for helping Burundi to get out of the crisis. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I would give the floor to the Honorable Senator Nuruddin Abatemi Usman from Nigeria.
Thank you, Mr. President, for this opportunity. I'd like to just speak to two things. First of all, may I appreciate the work done by the Council for Peace and Security. I recognize the challenges therein in your job, and a task like this needs a lot of resources, so whatever shortcomings there are in this paper, it's understood. Just two things that I want to talk to. I see that there's a mention of Boko Haram issue here, even though briefly. I wish you had given us more insight as to how far the fight against Boko Haram, which is one of the biggest insurgency facing us in Africa today. If you had talked a bit about the need for cooperation among countries, the need to share more information. As you can tell, in recent months, the successes that have been recorded. Boko Haram clearly is not a Nigerian issue. Yes, you clearly got it right that it's an asymmetric war, and this kind of terrorism is around border regions of nations. And so now you see it has eaten into Niger, it's eaten into Cameroon, it's eaten into Chad, which is maybe awoken the governments of these states to come together and share information. And I need not tell you how much successes in the last few weeks have been recorded. Happily, Honorable Usman alluded to it, even as recent as yesterday, heads of governments of the ECOWAS got together to re-emphasize the need for cooperation and sharing of intelligence. Secondly, and lastly for me, it's the issue of xenophobic attacks in South Africa. I know that the foreign minister, when he spoke, had made allusions to this. I know that the MPs here have mentioned it. But we cannot overemphasize the need to condemn these xenophobic attacks. As I was coming in this morning, my mission here, the Nigerian mission, was briefing me that xenophobic attacks continue up till this moment. There is an operation being carried out by the police and the military called Operation Fielo. Very importantly, 10 more seconds, Operation Fielo. And this is a continuation of this xenophobic attack. We are all Africans. We are all supposed to be our brothers' keepers. I mean, there are protocols to follow if you think things are not going well, if you think there are people who are occupying your country illegally. But xenophobic attacks cannot be the way, and it must be condemned in strongest terms. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I give the floor to the Honorable Rachel Shebesh from Kenya. Not here. I give the floor to the Honorable Bender Katari Jamal from Sahrawi Arab Republic.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I would like to thank as well Her Excellency the Ambassador for her brilliant presentation. I would like to add my voice to my colleagues to say that the African Union and the Peace and Security Council of the African Union have always been supporting the Sahrawi cause, but we're surprised to see that no reference was made in this report about what is going on and what is being done by the African Union and the Peace and Security Council. Therefore, I would like to support what has been said by my colleague Sinya, and at the same time, of course, we express our gratitude to the PAP, the Pan-African Parliament, for their support and help and assistance, and also would like to support the recommendation that has been proposed by my colleague, so that the Parliament reiterates its position and stands in favor of the Sahrawi cause. I don't want to hide that the African Union has a very advanced position through its Peace and Security Council. And as I said, we are really surprised that no reference whatsoever was made about what's being made by the Peace and Security Council of the African Union in relation to the sufferings and hardships of the Sahrawi people for 40 years now, more than 40 years now. Therefore, I wish that this be included in the report. And as I said before, I do support the recommendation that has been proposed by my colleague. Thank you very much.
And I give the floor to the Honorable Sulaima El Hamed from Sahrawi Arab Republic.
Gracias, señor presidente. Thank you very much. I wish to congratulate Amina Diallo, the ambassador, for her excellent report. And I wish to state that her report is positive in many senses and encouraging, since her report says clearly that we have advanced and that in Africa we are carrying out democratic elections in many African countries. And I wish to state that in Nigeria, and Tunisia and Burkina Faso, and in 2015 and 2016 will be years in which there will be important elections in almost 50 African countries. So that is why I say that this is encouraging and proves clearly that we are consolidating democracy and that we are advancing to a better future. And with the elections, we will have more justice in Africa, more prosperity and equality, and more peace in Africa. This is important. I also wish to congratulate the signing of the peace agreement in Mali between Azawad and the government of Mali, and congratulate at the same time our brothers and sisters of Algeria, since they have been able to create and have created the necessary conditions to the signing of this agreement of peace and reconciliation, and I wish that will be sustainable. It is also encouraging to know that after the epidemic of Ebola in Africa, we have challenged this epidemic, and we have gone through the worst moments, and now we are seeing better conditions. In addition to all of the efforts, I'd like to thank all of the efforts of all of the African institutions, everything that has been done by the whole world, but in particular, I wish to thank from the Pan-African Parliament the solidarity and initiatives by the government of Cuba. I wish to thank what the government of Cuba has done during the history of the African people and its unconditional solidarity towards Africa. But as all my colleagues have stated previously, it hurts that in a report on peace in Africa, the situation and problem of Western Sahara does not appear from the beginning, and this problem cannot be forgotten. It should be amongst the first lines of this report, since it is an extremely grave situation of an entire people that have been exposed to more than 40 years in occupied territories, confronting torture, prison, and I do believe that this should be amongst the first priorities of this report. I do hope that we will all unite in terms of also as soon as possible to speak about a prosperous Africa, peaceful Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Madame la Présidente, je voudrais maintenant donner la parole à l'honorable Gabriel
to recognize Honorable Gabriel Simit from Liberia.
Thank you very kindly, Mr. President. For me, the problem of security on the continent of Africa is a clear indictment for Africa's leadership. It speaks to the fact that Africa has had an ingrained and perennial system of failed leadership. Because leadership, being a functional word, has a responsibility of providing clear direction within which her people should be guided. Unfortunately, our leaders have failed to manage the natural resources of our continent with which we be endowed by God, and people in the midst of material prosperity live in a state of abject poverty. And so the Western imperialists, they make use of that opportunity to foster their ideology. Give them guns and they will kill themselves. We talk about the issue of Boko Haram in Nigeria. It is not the white man that coming himself to come and execute the cruelty against our people. They gave guns to our own brothers and sisters. In South Africa here, it is blacks that are killing blacks. So when African leaders rise up to the urgency of the movement, and they realize that by allowing the Western imperialist system to give us guns, that will cause our women to run in butchers with suckling mothers, seeing baby lying on their chest and die, all because we want to perpetuate ourselves in power at the disadvantage of the great majority of our people, then this issue of poverty will cease in Africa and we can have peace. Let us be mindful that holding a system of democratic election repeatedly in our country will ensure that we can have peace on the continent of Africa. No, we cannot have peace as long as there is ingrained injustice on our continent, where the vast majority of our people, including women and children, live in a state of abject poverty and neglect. We cannot have peace on our continent. And so we must learn to work together in a state of interdependence, sharing commonwealth, being our brother's keeper as Africans on this continent. It is only as such, with that spirit of cooperation, standing up for each other, that we can experience the quality of the peace that we yearn for, and by that, in a state of peaceful coexistence, Africa can develop beyond the stage, and we can put an end or a check to the Western imperialists who come and believe that Africa must be a ground for the sales of their arms that they manufacture, making billions of dollars out of the arm.
Thank you very much, dear colleague. And now I want to give the floor to Honorable Aidara Aishata from Mali.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Comme mes autres camarades, je vais féliciter.
Part, I would like to congratulate my sisters, and beyond congratulations, let me confess that I've met her in the corridors of the African Union Commission and in the plenary. She is really fighting and struggling among men to express her stances, and thanks to her, women could take the floor at the Peace and Security Council of the African Union in favor of Mali. I would like to reiterate what has been said by the chairperson of the Commission on Conflict and Cooperation. I cannot understand that as a parliamentarian we encourage coup d'etats. I do agree that we are seeking democracy and we do have a democracy crisis at the level, but I cannot understand that we as parliamentarians say that we support coup d'etats. I cannot do so and say so. The situation, and despite the signing of agreements in Mali, there are still attacks, and even yesterday there were attacks, and children and women are dying every day. The international community, including the African Union, tell us that those who were not going to sign the agreements will be punished or be under sanctions, but they do not tell us what would be the sanctions exactly. And these attacks are done under in the presence of the MINUSMA that it does not intervene. What is the African Union Commission doing in this respect? The UN mission shot down two young men and injured a number of them. What has the African Union Commission done in this respect? I would like to add that all the problems of Mali stem from Libya. For those among those who have not signed, the people of SEMA, one of them said officially on RFI that is Sarkozy, the president of France, that asked them to not to support Gaddafi, and that France will support them. Isn't there any provision to bring Sarkozy or France to before the court because of what they've done to Mali? Let me call upon CAP now to condemn thoroughly these acts and that Africa shoulders its responsibility more concretely for a final peace in Africa. There is a lot to be done, there's much to be done, and that will be speaking to these problems again and again. Thank you, Madam. Now Now I recognize Van Makari Tombo from the Gambia.
Thank you, Honorable President. Let me also thank Madam Amina Gibu Jallow for her presentation on the state of peace and security in our continent. Honorable President, I have a different perspective. Our founding fathers fought for our political independence. And when we gained this political independence, we are now bedeviled with instability and civil strife. As Professor said earlier, year in, year out, we have more trouble spots in Africa. And yes, we attribute this to a lot of things: governance issues, poverty, lack of jobs, etc., etc., etc. Even arms proliferation. But you have poverty in every part of Africa. In every country there is poverty. And yet still there are countries which are stable. What then, Honorable President, is Africa's problem? Africa is so strategically located and richly endowed. We will never be spared. We will be used to continue to oil the machines, the economic machines of the West, unless and until we do one thing, and only one thing. And that is, the Berlin Conference came and divided Africa, partitioned us into various fragments, even dividing families. We cried over it, but today we hold tight to those so-called boundaries, to a level that we emphasize independence and sovereignty. Honorable President, the way forward, until we change those boundaries and those countries into states, and Africa unified under one leadership, one people, one voice, we will continue to be bedeviled with these problems. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And now I want to give the floor to Henry Vanani from Namibia.
Thank you very much, Honorable Excellency President, the Presidium. It was not my intention to take the floor, but I'm intrigued by some of the comments that are made. First and foremost, let me say that peace can only be born and be sustained through the preservation of institutional integrity. Africa and Africa's problems lies with people's representatives. It lies with us here. People's representatives, members of parliament, that are eroding governance, institutions, and integrity of our institutions to allow a big man, big woman syndrome to take root in Africa. For as long as people's representatives and people's parliamentarians, legislators, are abiding by political parties, suppressive political party rules, that says allow one man to remain in power forever and it is okay. For as long as if African legislators are silent and mum over the issue of governance, peace cannot be preserved on our continent. If you look at what has happened in Nigeria, and I want to congratulate the people of Nigeria for what they have done in the last election, and something so unseen in many African countries, for an incumbent sitting head of state calling and congratulating a former adversary and giving him power freely and democratically. Had that not happened, had that call from President Goodluck Jonathan not happened in Nigeria, Nigeria would have been in a political crisis. It all has to do with us as representatives of the people to make sure that we do not erode governance. What is happening in Burundi and in many other countries is that we want to bend the rules Leave the institution for the men to preserve over institutions. And for as long as we do not preserve the integrity of our institutions, Africa would be at instability with itself. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much indeed.
Étant close, je voudrais inviter Madame l'ambassadeur, Son Excellence Madame
Mr. Speaker,
l'ambassadeur,
is closed. I would like to invite Her Excellency Madame the Ambassador to bring some clarifications and answers on the questions raised
apporter à son endroit. Madame l'ambassadeur, vous avez la parole.
Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Madame, you can sit, please.
Merci.
Thank you.
Je vous remercie, Monsieur le
I
Président,
thank you,
pour cette
Mr.
interaction très
Vice
riche
President, for this very rich debate that I will report undoubtedly to my colleagues of the AU Peace and Security Council. The whole issue we've been elaborating on is part of the vision of the African Union, that is a united Africa moved by its citizens. This is the struggle that we are delivering. But there are principles that should enable us to reach this Africa, a united Africa, one voice. And I was delighted to see that in the last page of your document, you said you made reference to one Africa, one voice. And the other one is an African solution to African problems. This is extremely important, and this should guide our actions in terms of peace and security. The developments that I've referred to are real. There are progresses, but there are also shortcomings, and the many crises haven't been settled. The one of Western Sahara, Great Lakes, Darfur, where the humanitarian situation is still a source of concern, and we cannot deny this. And the report of the state of peace and security is of 50 pages, and we try to summarize it to the crisis that have been followed by the PSC recently. But be assured that in 1 month from now, you will have a full report that includes all the crises, and it will be updated. All the data will be updated as you suggested. The issue of unconstitutional changes is a sensitive and delicate one, difficult one. This does not mean that we should avoid it. This is an issue that calls upon us, and the PSC has a public plenary session 1 month ago to deal with unconstitutional changes. And in this chamber, there have been two divergent positions on this issue. We are all champions of legality, but this legality should be highlighted with the possibility of having people's claims and the democratic sense that makes it possible for citizens to choose their leaders. But for the time being, this is an open issue, an open question, and the PSC has not yet found a total solution to the crisis that we've been experiencing recently, and on the term of unconstitutional change. In the past, we used to have classical changes, coups, but now we have changes in this definition. And I would like to invite you, as honorable parliamentarians, to think over this issue of unconstitutional changes and to help us adapt our text to the current context.
The issue of financial resources cannot be avoided. How can we talk about an African solution to African problems without resources? You rightly mentioned this. The member states are making significant sacrifices. Someone mentioned the troops that gave their lives. Not long ago in the PSC, we were discussing the situation in Somalia, and we commended the commitment of the countries who made available their troops, human resources, to assist this country to overcome the crisis. But at the same time, we should ask ourselves, and regret the financial situation we are in. We depend on foreign partners. More than 75% of the Peace and Security Council's budget is covered by foreign partners. We give our blood, we give our sons and daughters, and at the same time we are victims. This is priceless, but we know we can't do anything without resources. This brings me to the issue of arms trafficking. Some matters are dealt at the level of the Peace and Security Council, and other issues are dealt with within the organization or the African Union Commission. Last year, the debate was held, very comprehensive debate on how we can better control the movement of arms, budget issues and the linkages between the purchasing or the procurement of arms and state budgets. And this has a big impact on our security, and here we see big contradictions that we need to focus on. In our debate, we will subsequently follow a debate on the illicit financial flows by former President Thabo Mbeki. This is also an issue that deserves our attention. The lack of credibility of election monitoring and observation by the African Union. On this, I would like to say that it's better to have African observation, African observers, although they're not perfect. It's better than not having at all. Thanks to the initiatives of the African Union, the mechanisms and the commitment of member states, no state today can say they can do without elections. No. We can discuss the quality of the elections. The mechanisms of organization can be discussed. The organization and the need to improve the way the observers work. This is something that we need to address. As ambassador, like my colleagues, I also participated in missions for election observation. And some of the criticism raised here is very true. We cannot deny this. But at the same time, we were also welcomed by young people in our missions. Young people stopped us and said they were happy to see us. You will at least be here and we can avoid any rigging. And these are initiatives that we should commend. On women, in this regard, I thank the Honourable MP who said that women are not the leaders of rebellion. And I would even like to add that women are the unsung heroes of peace. And I commend all the women who participate in bringing about peace. It's true that we are the first to be victims, but we are also the ones without which we cannot find solutions to our problems. And even more, thanks to Resolution 1325, which this year we will commemorate. And we thank Namibia in passing, who will host us tomorrow as the Peace and Security Council, to commemorate this resolution 1325 in a context where the African Union declared 2015 as the year of women empowerment. The key issue of prevention of conflict, you have rightly pointed this out. Prevention enables to avoid issues on all levels, cost of conflict, human cost, financial cost of conflict. This is a key matter that we should work upon and improve our method of work. There are mechanisms in place, and they already have an impact. They function more or less. I grant this, but it's better than nothing. In the early warning mechanism, let me point out that there are two essential organs that have to be factored in. The panel of the wise that carry out consultation and mediation. And in the Burundian crisis, Edam Kojo, as a member of the panel of the wise, is working to bring peace to this country. There's also the continental early warning system. And in this, I would like to draw your attention to the fact that the African Union's standby force is working day and night, and I would like to pay a tribute to the young men and women who work every day to raise the alarm when issues break out. And this situation room, there's another issue that we should focus on, which is collecting data and indicators that need to be identified to make this an effective mechanism. We always follow the conflicts from outside. We read the reports. We draft reports, but this clearly does not suffice. And this rapid early warning system, we work with the United Nations and NGOs. But there is a shortcoming. If the member states do not embrace this process to provide data on looming conflicts, to participate in the peace process, as we often say in Niger, our hand cannot wash itself alone. We need two hands to wash our hands. So the member states must also accept and recognize that there is an emerging conflict that needs to be addressed. Otherwise, we will not be successful. Still, on the early warning system, you recently, last week, heard when the Chief of Defense Staff and Minister of Defense met to analyze the mechanisms for the prevention and conflict management, and they dealt with the issue of the contingents that the member states contribute. This is to respond to the issue raised by the Honourable MP, who asked what is the situation about the troops deployed on the ground. There are two aspects to take into account. Sometimes we announce troop contributions that are not forthcoming, and there's always the issue of resources that is raised. It's often difficult. There are logistical issues, problems of equipment, material, and so forth. And I confess what the Honourable of Chad said. We are indeed just taking stock of the situation. We know the causes. We do analyze them, and this always brings us back to the same facts that the Honourable MP of Niger pointed out. Development, peace and security, these three go hand in hand, together with the fight against poverty, injustice, the matter of including the youth and the women. All of your statements dwelled on these issues. And to respond to the Honourable Member of Parliament on the report on Burundi, this was a very useful report, and it was indeed used. You remember about 2 years ago or last year, there were already warning signs from the international community and in particular from the United Nations. And based on this report and based on the information gathered, the chairperson of the Commission met with the Burundian authorities. And ever since, the PSC has often been seized of the matter. In March this year, before the conflict broke out, in part of our discussions with our counterparts of the United Nations Security Council, who met with us in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, one of the sensitive issues or bones of contentions was how to manage the crisis in Burundi, how to avert the situation from turning sour, how to bring the protagonists to the negotiating table, and so forth. So all these reports contribute to the early warning system. I would also like to give you some information on the crisis in Mali. The Honourable Member of Parliament, His Excellency the Prime Minister, will recall that the PSC carried out a mission to Mali in March with its counterparts from the European Union with the aim of better appreciating the situation. Now, the information gathered on the ground, and indeed this was the first joint mission carried out, which was very fruitful. This convinced us that in our working methods we should replicate such practices. Instead of staying in our offices in Addis Ababa, we should go to the ground and assess the situation and get first-hand information from the protagonists. So on Mali, we met with the leaders, the rulers, and the members of the opposition. But what's most enriching for us was when we traveled to Gao, where we met with community leaders. This enabled us to verify the information, to corroborate the information in order to fill the gaps. And let me add to what I mentioned earlier, from tomorrow onwards, the PSC will be in Namibia for a retreat. And the purpose of this retreat is to focus on our working methods. These working methods should enable us to enhance synergy, to better coordinate our actions and become more effective. And on the working methods and synergy with the Pan-African Parliament, given the calls made by some honourable members of Parliament, I must mention the need that when we carry out strategic activities, we need to work together. From Addis Ababa, we recognize that our relationship with members of Parliament, the Pan-African Parliament, is not as we would like it to be. And we've identified some shortcomings. And recently, when the Pan-African Parliament is acting, we don't have enough exchange, there's not enough coordination. And very often what you hear is not often backed up. We don't support you enough in what you're doing. And in this regard, there is room for improvement of our cooperation and collaboration, not only with the Peace and Security Council, but also with all the organs and departments of the African Union Commission. I would like to thank you for all your recommendations, your observation, your positive criticism, enable me to realize and to echo what my sister from Rwanda, the MP, said, that we have not done enough. And indeed, this comforts me in the idea that we should not rest on our laurels. The challenges are formidable, but also I said earlier, together we can overcome our difficulties. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity, and thank you very much to represent the Peace and Security Council.
Thank you very much for the response and for all the issues that have been raised about peace and security on our continent. Your Excellency, Madam Chairperson of the African Union Peace and Security Council, we have benefited from the rich presentation and from the debate and your responses. We can see that the problem is not that we are not all aware of what the issues are. The problem is that we have not put in place mechanisms that can go to the root causes of these problems and deal with them. The problem is that as leaders on our continent, we have continued to sometimes play the ostrich, hiding our head in the sand and hoping that our bodies will not be seen. Excellency, honorable colleagues, the situation in Burundi is clear. The constitution is clear. And we are asking the leaders in Burundi to respect the very constitution that has brought them to power. We're asking the leaders in Burundi to take responsibility for the lives and properties of citizens of that country. Burundi's hard-won peace should not, for any reason, be sacrificed on the altar of political issues. We believe that the people of Burundi need to come together and work towards peace in an atmosphere that is not devoid of any level of militarization. The issue of the youths from Africa dying in the Mediterranean Sea, some said hundreds, but I've been to Europe last week to meet with the European Parliament on this issue on behalf of the Pan-African Parliament. The records show that thousands of African youths are drowning in the Mediterranean, all in a bid to get away from the life of poverty and hunger that they have found themselves in various communities within our continent. I had an opportunity to visit one of the camps where I spoke with one of the migrants, and the young man said to me that it is better for him to die trying to get to Europe than face the shame of being in his village, watching his mother and his brothers and sisters suffering from hunger and starvation without opportunities for employment. And we address the African leaders from the Pan-African Parliament today to say that the problem of African youths dying in the Mediterranean is not an European problem. It is an African problem. And we need to find African solutions to that problem. We must create within our various member states opportunities for our young men and women to find employment, to have a job that pays them a living wage, to provide access and opportunities for education for their children, access to health care, peace and security, an enabling environment for them to pursue their life's aspirations. That is the need of every African citizen, and that's not asking too much from our leaders. And so we're convinced that peace and security is key to development. There can be no development within our continent without peace. And the root causes of this crisis we find in many member states are well known, and most of the time very unnecessary and uncalled for. So we at the Pan-African Parliament join hands with you at the Peace and Security Council to work closely towards bringing about restoration of peace in the conflict areas within our continent. We thank you for the opportunity of coming to be with us. We thank you for your presentation. We wish you journey mercies back home, and God bless you. Honourable members, I put the report on peace and security in Africa for adoption. Agreed? The report is hereby agreed to. Honourable members, we now have some housekeeping announcements. Let me call on the Clerk of Parliament to make some announcements.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. The following committees will meet from 2 p.m. Agriculture, Health, Education, Justice and Human Rights, and the Committee on Transport. And the following committees will meet at 4 p.m. cooperation, finance, rules, family and trade. Thank you. Which rooms?
Thank you very much, honorable colleagues. Let me once again remind the chairs of the regional caucuses to meet with me in my office immediately after this session. Let me also invite the chair or deputy chair or rapporteur of the Rules Committee to please join us for the meeting this afternoon. Honorable members, I believe that I had opportunity yesterday to speak on the election issue within our parliament. We must, at all times, put the interest of this great institution over and above any other consideration. And I urge you once again to exercise utmost responsibility and restraint in carrying out this process. We, as umpires who have continued to observe elections in various member states, must live by the standards that we want others to be held on to. So I urge you and I thank you for your understanding, and I hope that this process would not in any way divide us, but rather would unite us. Honorable members, we now have come to the end of our business for today, and therefore this House stands adjourned until tomorrow, Thursday, 21st of May, 2015 at 9 o'clock. We also have for tomorrow the report of the illicit flow of funds. Honorable members, I crave your indulgence because this report is not ours. It is a report commissioned by the African Union and the ECA and the Conference of Ministers of Finance, Planning and Economic Development. We don't have a copyright to translate it into languages other than which the document was produced. So we're unable to produce it in all our functional languages that we use in this parliament. They only have them in English and French. So I urge you to please bear with us because we would have loved to translate it, but we don't have a copyright to do that translation. Copies are available as you leave. It's a very big document with over 100 pages. And so you take your time to study it because tomorrow morning, and I'll pray that we come on time, tomorrow morning we shall be having His Excellency, former President of the Republic of South Africa, President Thabo Mbeki, make a presentation on the work of his panel. I wish you a very good committee session this afternoon and see you tomorrow morning.